It's a new week, my starters. I'm glad to have you around yet again. The trial continues. You must remember the state witnesses have now testified. We have now applied for a section 174, which is where we are requesting the court to drop the charges against me. Now, the process. On that day, we got to court. They called up a few names, a few files. Cases were dismissed. Cases were remanded. Cases were postponed. Bail hearings happened. And then I was called to the dock. Now I'm called to the dock. Prior to all of this, it is important to note that my attorney, my advocate, actually called me a few days before to ask me whether I'm ready. And I asked him, why do I need to be ready this time around? And he stated that because we are applying for a section 174, this application is to request him to drop the charges. But it doesn't mean that we're going to win and the charges are going to be dropped. In other words, I must be ready to actually go for cross-examination. Meaning I must be my own defense should the section 174 not work out. I told him I was born ready, so I never have to get ready. No matter how difficult the case is my truth, and I'll stand for my truth. So if it does get to the point where I need to testify, then I will most certainly testify. So fast forward, we are now in the dock, and then my attorney has to now defend our case. Now, my advocate as a defense has to work on all the loopholes that were presented by the state witnesses. Remember, there are two of them, there's only one of me. The state witnesses have to corroborate their story so tightly, it must be so tightly knit, that there aren't too many loopholes for us to work around. But fortunately for us, there were many loopholes for us to work around. The first thing that is in contrast is that the gentleman who says that I pushed him across the chest didn't state what the lady stated. The lady stated that I did indeed push him on the chest, but I pushed him and he hit against the car. Whose car? The driver's car, my friend's car. This was not mentioned by the guy who was actually pushed. So it's a big loophole, because if indeed I was pushed, would I not remember being pushed and hitting the car? That's a major detail. The second detail is that the officer who is the state witness, number 2, the female, conceded and said that I did not assault her. Now that one, as I stated in the previous video, was a big win. It was a major win because she stated that I did not assault her. So that is great news for us. Whereas the other gentleman said that I assaulted both of them, right? Their statements had stated that I assaulted both of them. But on the stand, asked several times, she conceded that I did not assault her. I explained in the previous video why that was such a big deal. So if you didn't watch the previous video where she's the state witness, where I detail it in full 35 minutes of her cross-examination process and the notes that I took down, then I suggest you go watch part 7, because this is part 8. Then the other loophole is that the issue of the state actually building their case. Number 1, they didn't mention anything about the footage. We did. Number 2, there are backup police that came to the garage to make the arrest. There were no statements by the backup police. There were no statements by the arresting officers. Another loophole is that the first state witness said that he arrested me. In the other cross-examination, where it's the second state witness, she stated that she's the one that actually did the arrest. Then if you listen to my version, you'll find out that neither of them actually made the arrest. It was the backup police that made the arrest with zero resistance from my end. So that's another loophole, right? Then there's the loophole of saying that I was carried to the car during this particular arrest. The first state witness said that I was resisting and interfering with their duties to the extent that they carried me to the back of the van and threw me in there. The female officer stated none of that and was asked about that, and she stated that that didn't happen. Then my version also differs, because when the backup police came, they instructed me to turn around. I already had one handcuff on my wrist and they put the second one on, and then they instructed me to start walking towards the vehicle. I walked with them, 3 police officers, one on my right, one on my left, and one behind me, and we walked towards the police van. When we got to the van, they instructed me to go inside. That's when I turned around and asked, why am I being arrested? And they said, Thula wena Hleve, and they pushed me in. So that's the version of what actually happened in this particular case, right? So that's another loophole that was there. So that's what we actually worked on. There's also the issue of the firearm. The corroboration was not quite clear-cut between the state witnesses, because one of them said that she came in between us during this so-called scuffle, and then I put my hand on the gun, and then they tried to remove my hand from the gun, right? Then the position in which the gun was held, where I put my hand on the gun, the explanation of the bud, how the gun actually is, how she was in between us, why the firearm was not used by the other officer, all those intricacies were then contradictory between these 2 state witnesses. So that's how you realize that there were some loopholes for us to actually work on against these particular officers. Then here's the submission from the state. Remember, the state has a duty and impetus to prove beyond reasonable doubt that I did exactly what they say I did. I am guilty of exactly what they accuse me of being guilty of. So the prerogative is not on us. We merely have to show that their story is not clear. These are the loopholes, and indeed, this case is unfounded. So they have to then prove beyond reasonable doubt. Now, the state worked on 3 pieces of work. They worked on proving beyond reasonable doubt. They worked on pushing the narrative that credibility is not the key factor in this particular case. And they worked on we having no evidence to prove my version compared to the version of the police officers. He also worked on the fact that there are 2 police officers, and the critical points. The critical points in this case are the ones that the so-called police officers corroborate on or actually align with, compared to the loopholes that my lawyer is highlighting. And therefore, I need to be answerable when it comes to what he is saying. All right? So that was the important thing there. And then there's the issue of the averments being made and the duplication of charges. This is where now the court came in and asked the state, because there are these 3 charges, isn't there duplication of charges somewhere? Because the charge is resisting arrest, then it's assault by pushing a police officer and assault by pushing a police officer. The resisting arrest and interfering with the police duties was clumped up into one. And then that's where the court was like, they feel like there's a duplication of charges here, so as to make the case somehow stronger than it actually is, right? Then the state tried to argue this issue of duplication of charges, and then the court just let it rest. Then the court had to make their decision specifically regarding the Section 174 application. So there's 3 counts, right? So count 2, which is where the charges stated that I assaulted the female officer. For count 2, the court granted the dropping of that charge. So I was no longer being charged for assaulting this female police officer. There was a direct win that came out basically from the state witness shooting their case in the foot, but also from my advocate fighting and highlighting it yet again to say that the assault never happened. Then for count 1 and count 3, the court did not grant the dropping of charges, meaning now those are the 2 counts that I am fighting, count 1 and count 3. The resisting arrest and interfering with police duties and the assaulting of the other police officer. We now have to prove from our evidence that I did not do that. And the only way that is possible is for me to be answerable on the stand, to go and testify. And guess what? I'm always ready, born ready, so I never have to get ready, baby. And that meant I immediately was asked to proceed to go testify. I was asked which language I prefer. I said we can proceed with English, and then I had to do the oath. I will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God. I needed to confirm my name, my full name and surname again, and I then was asked my profession, and so the testifying actually began. Now, I'm not gonna go round and round and retell you the story of my version of things. I can just tell you in summary some of the critical points that may have happened during my testifying, particularly with the cross-examining from the state's perspective, because video 1, part 1 of this series basically is the one that has my version, how the arrest actually happened up until we're thrown into the police cell. So there's no reason for me to reverberate those particular points. But I'll say this. So I did take the oath. Then I was asked my name and surname in full, and then my profession, and then my counsel led. Right? They led with some questions. Do you remember what happened? Explain to the court what happened. And then with each and every sentence, I had to be patient so that the court takes their notes and also the state prosecutor takes their notes. My lawyer already had his notes. And you know what was important? If you are going to testify, you have to have already an example in your mind of someone who knows how to testify, but also is clean within the lines of testifying, right? I already knew that because I'm defending myself, I am going to have the Julius Malema mentality when I'm on the stand and how he deals with these AfriForum lawyers, right? But at the same time, I knew that I couldn't cross the line because the parameters within which I'm addressing the court is that even the reflection of the way we tshwara, the reflection of how you present yourself, your mannerisms, the nuances in your sentences, your directness in answering questions, the tone, the formality, they look at all of that. They look at all of that, and your overall character and personality is then surmised based on all of that. And thus, I had to focus on just answering questions directly, being truthful, being the most important aspect here, because that is what you are there to do, to be truthful, right? So from the way I was dressed, I was presentable. The way I was speaking, I was audible. There was a mic. I was given the option to sit or stand, and I chose to stand. The person asking me the questions, there was eye contact. So when I was addressing my counsel, eye contact. When I'm addressing the magistrate, eye contact. When I'm addressing the state prosecutor, eye contact as well. So those were key elements that basically brought me the necessary favor instead of killing the case, despite the fact that my story was being honest and truthful at that particular point in time, right? So my lawyer then asked me to present the case, and I presented it from when we were stopped to when we were arrested to when we were taken to the police station and so on. And in between, he'd fill in the blanks of certain points that he'd like us to basically highlight so that we cover every single aspect. But I also needed to add to the court the emotional turmoil that I went throughout this entire process. I needed to also highlight to the court how my character and reputation is being compromised here. I also had to emphasize to the court how important important it is for these charges to be dropped, because they are fallacious and they actually are bad in representing who I am, what I do, and what I represent, right? So then the state prosecutor had to then dig through whatever loopholes he could to match the story of the state witnesses, and he couldn't. He couldn't pierce through anything that I had to say. He tried. He tried to repeat himself. He tried to ask the same questions in different ways. And he still couldn't penetrate my story, because when you are telling the truth, no matter how robust the discussion can be, no matter how hitting they can try and come with you at various angles, the truth will remain the truth. My version of the truth will remain my version of the truth, because it's a lived experience for me. It's not just wishy-washy and I'm just presenting whatever is being said for that moment to favor me in that moment. So I then had to answer, and he was trying to dig, he was trying to penetrate, he was trying, to ask similar questions to the ones that he asked the state prosecutor, and it didn't work. Questions like, did they ask you to present your peace officer card? And I would say, no, they didn't ask me. And then why did you take it out? And I would tell him I was building rapport, because we are all professionals. We are all professionals. We are within law enforcement. And thus, if they are coming and presenting themselves in a way that doesn't actually suit the professionalism around law enforcement, then it's good for them to know that they are dealing with another law enforcer. And this, they must go within the boundaries of the law. They must stick to procedure and protocol. And that's basically why I was sharing with them that I'm a peace officer. That's just an example, right? I was also very adamant in presenting my points exactly how they happened. And even when representing the dialogue from all angles, I would quote verbatim. So, for example, when the police officer who was saying to us, why didn't you stop? And as the driver, who was my friend, was trying to answer that particular question, I had to ask the court, can I quote him verbatim, even when it comes to the vulgar language that he used? And the court said, represent the information exactly what it is. So I was given the opportunity to say exactly what the police officer said, which is, you are fucking drunk. That's why you didn't stop. I said it as it is. And that's what you need to do when you represent yourself on the stand. You must be confident. And there was a time when, I'm telling you, the way I was representing myself in that court, there were other cases that were still upcoming. But boy, it was as if they didn't want me to stop. They wanted me to keep going. They wanted me to keep going. They wanted me to keep going, because those cases could have been dealt with when we took a break. Instead, they put me back on the stand, and it continued, right? Which was very unfamiliar territory, since I had been attending court for the last 11 months. Very unfamiliar territory, but interesting nonetheless. And by the time it was all said and done, the court had one simple question for me: where is the driver? And I had to state, well, he had his own case that was dealt with. Then they asked, are you and the driver still friends? So now I've testified on both sides. The state prosecutor is done, my counsel is done, and the court is now asking, are you and the driver still friends? And I had to be honest, because as I've stated, since going through this entire journey, he was not around. We're not speaking. I didn't know what the trigger was. I was going through what I was going through, and I didn't know what he was going through. And I stated to the court, no. The honest answer is that we are no longer friends. And then the court asked, why? Was there some sort of fallout, or what happened? And I stated to the court that we actually haven't been friends since this case started. So that actually must have piqued or intrigued. It must have piqued the court's interest to say, this guy is going through this entire thing as a passenger. Where is the driver in all of this? So with everything that happened, Even my lawyer at the end of it was like, no, the court was just probably asking for formalities and to actually get to understand why possibly the driver is not here or hasn't ever been present, and why possibly I was the only person, right, who was at this entire through this entire ordeal. How is it that I was my only witness, whereas the driver could have been another witness for us, right? So obviously the court is asking itself those particular questions, and the court is also asking itself the impact of that particular thing. But the cross-examination happened, came and gone, and then it was a matter of determining what's next. And what's next is the judgment. What's next is the judgment. So this is where now the state prosecutor states the date of availability. My counsel agrees, and the magistrate says that they are going to go through the entire case file, all the dockets, all the information presented, all the state's witnesses, the transcripts, everything as it pertains to this case, and then a judgment will be delivered in the next sitting, in my next appearance. Then the court reminded me I am on bail, my bail has been extended, reminded me of the conditions of the bail, and should I not adhere to the conditions of the bail, a warrant of arrest will be sent out. You know, I heard that so many times that by the time she said it, it was so entrenched in my mind, blistered in my mind, that I knew the exact words that were coming. So my bail got extended, and on the next video, I'll be sharing what should have been the judgment, but the court actually hit us with a curveball. I love you, my starters, and I will leave you with this. This is the definition of faith, which I read from the book Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. I read it back in 2018. And the definition of faith stuck with me from there. It says, faith is the external elixir which gives life, power, and blessings to the impulse of thought. Faith is the external elixir which gives life, power, and blessings to the impulse of thought. So in other words, faith is what enables you to think, then decide, then action and implement, then evaluate your decision at the end of the day. So I love you, I appreciate you, and I'll see you on the next one. Cheers, my starters. Faith is the external elixir which gives life, power, and blessings to the impulse of thought. 𝐿𝐿